Hey guys! Today I'm going to be showing you how to set up your 4x4. This method will work well on any 4x4, but I will be using the Valk 4M to demonstrate, and the lubes that I'll be using work particularly well on the Valk 4M in my opinion. For this setup I'll be using 3 lubes: Lubical Silk for the pieces, Cubical Weight 5 Silicone Lube for the inner edges, and Angstrom Gravitas for the centers. It's certainly not necessary to have these specific lubes to make your cube turn out well, but like I said before, these 3 lubes work very well on this cube. But you can use whatever lube you have to follow along with this tutorial. And the only other things you'll need to set up your cube are a cloth and a paper towel. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is disassemble the cube. So lay down your paper towels and let's start disassembling. Pop out an edge like that. Then you can pop out the center, and then it should pretty easily come apart. If it's really hard to get apart, then you might want to loosen the cube, but make sure you do it on all 6 sides so that it stays even. Also, 4x4s have a bunch of little pieces, so try not to be too crazy when you take apart your cube so that you don't lose any of them. Like that. So now that you've taken all of the pieces off of the core, place the core to the side, and then what I like to do next is sort all the pieces into the different types. So I would make one pile of these edges, another pile of centers, a pile for corners, and a pile for each of the inner pieces. Now that we've sorted the pieces into piles, we're going to take our cloth and start to clean the pieces individually. This way, you can make sure that all the factory lube is off and you have a fresh start when adding your own lube. After you've done the pieces, it's also a good idea to wipe down the core. Now that all of our pieces are cleaned and sorted, we're going to begin reassembling the cube, and at certain spots along the way, we will add some lube. To begin, we're going to build on 1/8 of the cube, and it's going to look like this when it's done. For this part, I'm going to be using the Weight 5 and Gravitas, and this part is going to use a lot of these internal pieces. The first thing we want to do is use internal pieces to connect 2 of the centers. In order to help the square part stick to the circular part, I'm going to add a little bit of Angstrom Gravitas in between them and then spin it around a bit to get it really stuck on there. Even though it won't hold it perfectly, it should make it stick more than it was before. Now let's do the same thing to a second center. Now I'm going to put down the core for a second, making sure not to rest it on either of the 2 centers that I just lubed. And I'm going to grab 3 internal pieces, one of the larger ones and 2 of the smaller ones. They fit together like this, but once again I'm going to lube them to make them stick together better. However, for the internal pieces I'm going to use Weight 5. And I'm just going to put a little bit on the contact points so that they stick. Now these should stick together fairly well, and I'm going to place them between these two centers. However, I actually think it's easier to just start with two of them, so I'm going to set the other small internal piece to the side for just a second. And I'll actually put a tiny drop of lube on the top of this internal piece so that it sticks to the center. Now this part is tricky, but I'm going to try to hold the center and the internal pieces like this. And then I'm going to try to slip the last internal piece into the center. You just kind of have to wiggle it around a bit, and then it should slide in. Try not to get frustrated if this takes a few tries, because this is for sure the hardest part of assembling a 4x4, and so it can be very difficult to get right on the first time. I've assembled quite a few 4x4s before, and this part is still kind of difficult for me, so don't give up if it doesn't work the first time. And also rest assured that it will get easier after we get the first eighth in, because then everything will have sort of a base to be steadied upon, so it won't be so difficult after that. So now that we have these two centers connected, I'm going to connect this center to this one so that we have sort of a little L shape of centers and internal pieces to start adding external pieces on top of. So I'm going to get out my Angstrom Gravitas again. And I'm going to try to stick these two together. Now we can make another little internal piece bridge across these two centers. So I'll put down the core, take my internal pieces, and lubricate the middle one. Then I'm going to slip in these internal pieces gently, or I'll try to do it gently. There we go. Alright, now I'm going to try to slip in this second internal piece. Just like that. Alright, well, if you made it this far, congratulations, you got through the hardest part of this process. Now that the internal pieces are connecting these three centers, we can hold the middle center at the bottom and start adding external pieces. So when you assemble a 3x3, you really have to pay attention to what pieces you put in where, because you could end up with a flipped edge or a twisted corner. With 4x4, you can still end up with a twisted corner, but you can't end up with a flipped edge or two swapped edges because you have parity. So the only thing you have to pay attention to is the corners, and the way I do that is I make sure that the corners all form a solved cube amongst themselves, and I'll explain what that means when I get to it. But as far as the other pieces go, I just grab a piece and throw it in. To start off, we're going to take a center piece and drop it down in here. Then we're going to take two edge pieces and put them on either side of the center piece. And then in between those is going to be a corner piece. So I'm going to start off with the yellow, green, and red corner, and then I will just build the rest of them off of that. Next, we're going to take two more center pieces and drop them on top of the edges. And then we're going to put an edge piece in between those. And as you can see, a magnetic cube helps a bit with assembly because it helps all the pieces snap into place and holds everything together. So those are all of the external pieces that are going to go in the first eighth of the cube. To finish it off, we are going to span the gap between these centers with more internal pieces. However, because we've already built some of the cube, it's going to be a lot less difficult than it was before. So we can pretty much just plop the pieces in, and it shouldn't be a problem. And there you go, we have completed about the first eighth of the cube. Next, we're essentially going to double what we just did and build into this area over here. In order to do that, we need to connect this centerpiece to one of these. I'll connect it to the bottom one. Next, I'll take 3 more of these internal pieces, and although I probably don't need to anymore, I'm still going to add a little bit of lube to stick them together. I will put the first 2 on the bottom one, and then I'll take this last one and slip it in between the internal piece and the top center, just like that. And the order of pieces for this one is the exact same. So center, an edge on either side, and then a corner. And since last time we used the yellow, red, and green corner, in order to make sure that all the corners are solved, we are going to put in the yellow, red, and blue corner for this section. Next, we add centers on either side and an edge in between. And then, just like last time, we're going to put in the internal pieces between these 2 centers. So now that we've assembled these 2 sections, the cube's going to be a bit sturdier and less difficult to assemble. From now until the last 2 sections or so, there's nothing really new in the assembly, so I'm going to speed up the process. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is exactly what I've done so far. Add internal pieces between the centers, and then fill in the spaces in between with external pieces. And of course, I'm going to pay attention to make sure that the corners stay solved. In the interest of time, I'm going to speed up this part, but I will slow down when I add lube to the external pieces because I haven't showed that part yet. Here I am going to finally add some of this lubrical silk to the pieces. Looking at where the pieces contact each other, most of the surface area of the edge comes into contact with other pieces. This comes into contact with another edge, this touches the corner, and these 2 sides touch the centers. Additionally, this partially contacts the corner stock. So I'm pretty much going to lightly cover the entire edge with lubrical silk, and that should take care of most of the contact points. Since the centers are so thin, you don't really need to lube them, but you can lube this little area if you want. Basically, I just partially squeeze out a drop, and then I move it around the piece where I want it to touch. Then I'll just pop the edge in and continue on with my assembly. And from now until around the last 2 sections, that's going to be how I lube the pieces, so I'll just speed up most of the rest of the assembly. Okay, so now we've reached the last 2 sections, and the first thing I'm going to do at this point is just add a final small coating of silk around the pieces and the internals. And next, I'm going to add in the final set of internal edges. However, I am going to slightly offset the top layer to make it easier to get these in. And hopefully the last one should just slide in. There we go. Now that I have these internals in, I can finish putting in the external pieces. And these ones might be slightly tricky because it's getting a bit more closed in now. For these, I'm not going to worry about lubricating because I just did that last round of silk, and if I need to add more lube, I can always take a few pieces out anyway. Here, it's probably helpful to put in these pieces last. I don't have a set way of doing these last few sections. I just try to figure out what's least likely to make the cube fall apart. So I think saving the last two centers and edges is probably a good idea. So once you have the other pieces in, you can try to pop in the last two centers. And the last two edges. Alright, and there you have it. You have set up your 4x4. Now, it's worth noting that there are a few small other steps that you might want to take, like wiping off the outside of the cube to get rid of the lube, and of course, you're going to want to break in the cube. It's likely that once you finish setting up your cube, it's going to feel a little bit gummy and slow at first, at least if you did the same thing that I did to set mine up. But when I did this on my other Valk 4M, it went away very quickly and turned into an amazing feeling cube. So just stick with it, break it in a bit, and then see if you like it after that. If you need to add more lube, you can always do that, but if you need to take some away, that's going to be a little bit trickier. That's why I like not to completely douse the cube in lube when I'm setting it up, because it makes it easier to add more later. So that's it for this video. I'll leave a solve at the end on this cube after I've broken it in. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed and were able to make your cube as good as you wanted it to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!